Hello weirdos, welcome back to my channel. My name is EmmaAbe and we talk about books, and we have a little guest with us. She was super stinky, so I had to give her a bath. So now the baby smells all clean, isn't that right? Okay, so today I'm here to do a very long overdue monthly wrap-up. So this will be my monthly wrap-up for the month of April. I read 18 books in April and it was kind of a mixed bag. Read some good stuff, read some meh stuff, read some stuff I didn't like. Let's get started because I kind of want to go through this a little bit fast because it's late and I want to go to bed. So first book I read is The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind. This is by William Kinkwamba and Brian Miller. Don't know how to pronounce that. Oh my goodness, I loved this book. I thought this book was so moving, so inspirational. Some of the parts of this book were truly horrifying and really disturbed me, especially when it talks about starvation and a little bit about what people do in desperate situations with starvation. It just really got to me, and those chapters in the books were really hard to read. It was a little bit more towards the beginning, but still centered towards the middle. So be ready for that. I think this man is just so smart. When he was describing how he basically put together this windmill, I was all like, I cannot believe you figured that out all just from textbooks. Like, kudos to you. It's really awesome. So this is a story about this young boy living up in Malawi, which is a country in Africa, and they struggle with getting like consistent resources like water and electricity. And what's really cool about this is that he decides to build a windmill to help generate electricity for mainly his room. And it was so cool because it talked not only about the whole scientific process of that, but it also talked about his life before and a little bit about his life after. And just so remarkable because he constantly says that he wasn't trying to gain any notoriety. He just wanted the lights to be on at night. And I think that there are some really positive messages about Africa that breaks down stereotypes that a lot of people have about about that continent. Which really, Africa is really full of a bunch of resourceful people who are making the best and being really creative to find solutions to their problems. And I just thought this was so inspiring and I would recommend it. It was like 10 out of 10. I loved it. The next book is The Address Book by Deirdre Mask, and I can't talk too much about that one because I read it for the BookTube prize. Luckily though, BookTube prize round 2 is almost over, so that video should be out in the next 2 weeks. So that's exciting. The next book is The Queen of Nothing by Holly Black. The reason I read this is because it won the YA fantasy from the Goodreads Choice Awards. And I have not kept it a secret that this series by Holly Black is not my favorite. I'm just not a fae person. That's not the type of fantasy that I like or enjoy, which is fine. Everybody is entitled to their own opinions. I will say though, this was my favorite book out of all of them, out of all 3 that I read. That's a low bar though. I didn't enjoy it super much. At the end of the day, I think it was just a little bit too short. I didn't really understand the direction of the book. I think it's a really interesting premise. You have this woman. She is, the queen of nothing. She was tricked into becoming the queen of this fairyland, and she was tricked and basically told to leave. She had to leave, and so now she's living in the human world and like basically working as a freelance assassin to make ends meet. And there's gearing up for this big epic showdown, and it was disappointing. There was not a lot of battles, and the battles that we did see were smaller scale. I wanted to see like the 2 armies clash, and that just didn't happen, and I thought that was disappointing. And then like the big twist when the curse is like kind of revealed and happens, I was kind of disappointed in how that all played out, but also I ultimately wasn't surprised. So I don't know. I did not like it, but it was like my favorite out of all three of them that I read because I think it went a little bit more intense than some of the other ones. And yeah, I just didn't buy like the romance either. So, oops. Anyway, moving on. The next book I read is A Promised Land by Barack Obama. And this is also a BookTube prize book, but this also won, I believe, the memoir, nonfiction, one of the nonfiction categories. I enjoyed it. I think Barack Obama is a really good writer. My one quibble with this book is how fucking long it is. It is ridiculous, like over 30 hours in the audiobook, and it just felt like someone needed to go through and edit it. And we're not even, by the end of the book, you're not even done with his first presidency. You kind of end when Bin Laden was murdered, was assassinated. And like that wasn't the end of his first term. And there is a whole another book coming out. And I just was like, I was just like, what? I did say I wanted more about his childhood in the book. I found that to be really interesting. However, I've since like reading it, I kind of figured out that if I want some of that, I should look towards some of his other books, which I have. I have a bunch of his other books, so I'll be interested in reading some more of his other books to read more about his childhood. But yeah, it's a solid book. It's just too long. If you guys want to trudge through like 700 pages, go ahead. It's good. Every bit of it is good. It's just it was a little bit too detailed and a little bit too long. I would have been fine if like the series of memoirs was like more a series, but with like shorter books. But that's just me. In my opinions, the next book I read is Harriet Beecher Stowe, A Life by Joan D. Hedrick. The reason why I read this, and I even picked this up in the first place, is because where I volunteer at the Harriet Beecher Stowe House, this used to be a book that was like mandatory for all docents to read. This was very informative. It had a lot of details in it, but oddly enough, it didn't have like the details like where I wanted them to. It gave a lot of explanations kind of about like the writings and the different writings that like the books and stuff that Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote about, which was fun to get those more in details. And it does give background like about her family and her brothers, but I guess I wanted more time spent in like her personal life and kind of speculating on like how she felt and about things, and more of like what her letters say about what was happening at certain points in her life. And it was really focused more on like her work. So it was just interesting. It wasn't bad. It was good. It's informative. It was weirdly detailed and not detailed in the places that I wanted it to be. Like, for example, it talks a little bit about the research process into the book, the big book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, but it doesn't go into the level of detail that I wanted in that. And I wanted to hear more about like the talks that went on at the Lane Seminary, and that was just really brushed over really quickly. I wanted to know like how did the deaths like of her children like affect her, because some of her children died. What was it like living next to other like prominent writers in New England? And it just didn't touch on as much detail in that. So in that way, it was weird and kind of not what I wanted. Next book I read is Fangs by Sarah Anderson. This got second in the graphic novel category, and I didn't like it. I did not like it at all. So this is basically meant to be like a story between a werewolf and a vampire. And that premise is really interesting. And I was going in there expecting a story. And what I got was a series of vignettes, each vignette lasting maybe 1 to 2 pages, and all kind of centered around like some aspect of what it would be like having this pair of a vampire and a werewolf. And I just was like, what? Some of the stuff was funny. So like, for instance, one of the jokes in it, I don't have a picture of it, but one of it's like, oh, what does consent look like for her? And she's the vampire. And so he has to basically invite her into his home, and what consent looks like for him, which is, saying yes to having sex. There were like parts that I enjoyed, but I just wanted something to happen beyond a series of vignettes like that, and it wasn't. I will admit though that the actual like book and like design for the book is cool. The artwork wasn't anything special to me. Yeah, I just was greatly disappointed by this book, and I don't really have much else to say other than that. I will say though, it makes a lot of sense that it's kind of a series of vignettes because it was originally published as a webcomic, and I didn't know that going into it, and I kind of figured out through the course of me reading it, and yeah, it was disappointing. So I think I enjoy my webcomics to have a little bit more plot than that one had, but that's just my opinion. The next book I read is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This won the second place for mystery for the Goodreads Choice Awards. I love this. I felt like I was like peeling back an onion. There just kept being things being revealed, and I felt very satisfied with how it ended. I was very pleased. The whole time I was like waffling because I was like, how paranormal is this shit? Because one of my like things that I don't like in mysteries or horror, I don't like paranormal stuff. I'm just not that kind of person. I don't find it scary. I just loved kind of how everything was revealed. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. All of the questions that I had were answered, and I don't really want to spoil anything else about this book because I think you should go read it. Again, this is another one where I think you should read it. I had a fun time with it. Yeah, I was constantly like wanting to pick it up and keep reading, and I don't want to tell you guys any more about it. So just go read it. Also, I was not expecting much out of this book. The cover design kind of left me wanting. Like, I think it's cool, but it didn't make me feel things. Anyway, moving on to the next book. I read Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I should have saved this to read in October for Dia de Muertos, because a large part of the book like takes place during Dia de Muertos and like leading up to Dia de Muertos. And I just loved the celebration of Hispanic culture. I loved the two characters coming together as a pair. So, okay, essentially what this book about is you have Yadriel. This is Yadriel, and he is a brujo, and he grew up in a family of brujex, which are just as it sounds. They practice a lot of like magic, dealing with like the dead and like healing, and has lots of roots in Aztec traditions and all of that stuff. But I really, really enjoyed like the references to Xibalba and all of this other stuff in it. Such a fun exploration of Latinx culture, and I just loved it so much. Love this when this happens in books, and that is when Spanish is spoken and there's no translation. So sometimes there'll be like not whole conversations, but parts of conversations that will happen in Spanish, and it's up to the reader to figure out exactly what they're saying. And I love that. I love when I see that in books because it's one of my pet peeves, especially when I'm reading Spanish. Oh my gosh, I loved all of the characters. They're all so great. I thought that I really like that you go on a journey with Yadriel in the process of him falling in love with Julian. Also, another thing, I'm not explaining the plot of this book very well. So essentially, Yadriel's trans and wants to prove to his fellow brujex that he is a brujo and he should be treated as a brujo and be able to have all of the rites and ceremonies. And he's dealing with, and unsurprisingly, a Hispanic culture that isn't very accepting and having to deal with that. So one of the ways he tries to prove himself is when his cousin Miguel goes missing and dies. He tries to summon and figure out exactly what happened to Miguel. and instead of summoning Miguel, he summons Julian, who is a fellow teen who goes to his high school, a Latinx person, and they just kind of have to figure out what happens. It's a mystery that unfolds over a couple of days and ends with Dia de Muertos. Again, love the slow build of the relationship. I thought it was really cute. I felt a lot of the things that Yadriel was going through with his binder. I was like, I feel you. I feel all of that. Do I need to buy more? Yes. Other things, I loved the moment where Julian, they're so dumb. They're idiots in love, and I love idiots in love. But I loved the moment where Julian, like, they're, long story short, where like Julian is found over Yadriel's body by basically all of Yadriel's family, and he just screams, es mi querido, él es mi querido, and it just was, I love that, because like that declaration at that point in the story was just so good. Anyway, so good, highly recommend it. It's queer, obviously. There's gender queerness that goes along with it. The audiobook, highly recommend that. I read this with audiobook and following along, and the narrator is non-binary or gender fluid. I don't remember off the top of my head. So good. It's beautiful, and if we take the sleeve off, look at that. It's so good. Read it. Everybody's talking about it because it is so good. Next book I read is The Dead Are Arising by Les Paynes and Tamara Payne, and I can't talk about that one either because it's a book that I was assigned for the BookTube prize. So again, wait for that video. You're gonna get a lot of that in this. I read a lot of them. The next book I read is Such a Fun Age, and this one's by Kylie Reed. This one, I think new author, I don't remember. It won like new release, like best new release. It's a good book. I just didn't kind of connect. I was very much like from the beginning, and since I had heard of it, I was kind of skeptical. Like, I just don't understand what is going to happen, because the whole inciting incident is that this Black woman, the main character, she is taking care of this wealthy white family's daughter, and there is a like window that is broken, violently broken. It's clearly an attack on the family, and she is asked to take the young child out to the grocery store just to get her away, so she doesn't have to see all of the police and stuff. While they're there, there's a video taken of a very traumatic encounter between the babysitter and like the security guard. It's a whole thing. Yeah, it was a good conversation starter. Throughout this book, you kind of have the babysitter, it's kind of like being pulled in two different directions. You have the woman that she is babysitting for, who's kind of like this like guru, and there's so much body shaming with that character in particular that she does to herself and she does to other characters that that really put a bad taste in my mouth personally. And she's just like very like much a performative activist, and she has some sus stuff going on in her past as well. And then you also have this man that the babysitter is like going out with. He also like is, this like white person who's all his friends are Black. He only dates Black women, blah 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 blah. And there's some interesting like conversations about like what it is to be an ally and how to be like a good ally from a Black person's perspective. And I enjoyed those conversations. This boyfriend and the mother kind of both criticizing each other, and they're both kind of right and they're also both kind of wrong. Yeah, I just didn't feel much about it, honestly. There you go. It was just meh. The next book I read was Beach Read by Emily Henry. No, not for me. This was the runner-up winner for the romance. Yeah, I just didn't care for it. Didn't care for the characters. Didn't care for the plot. was not something I really liked. It got too heavy for me in places. Yeah, it wasn't for me. It just wasn't for me. I think I would have enjoyed the story a lot more if the characters were queer. I hate to say that, but it just was like almost like a dime a dozen book. Like, sorry, I don't know what else to say about it. It just wasn't for me, and that's that. The next book I read was Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram X. Kendi. This is like the kids version. This won the kids Goodreads Choice Award prize thing. Yeah, it was cute. It was very short. I liked that. It wasn't poems. I liked that. And in the end, at the very end, it has like resources for parents and like advice for parents for how to raise a kid to be anti-racist. I think it's a good cause. You know, fine book for a kid. Yeah, I don't have much feelings beyond it other than that. Then the other kids book, the runner-up, was the next book I read, and that is Just Like Me by Vanessa Brantley Newton. It was fine. It's the kids' books. I don't have much thoughts on them. I don't have any children. I think it's good for kids. You know, the artwork is pretty cool. There's lots of like different, there's lots of diversity in terms of what the kids look like in the book. And the poems are fine. They're like, you know, written for children. And I don't have much else to say about it. It was just kind of meh. The next book I read was Fever, Feuds, and Diamonds by Paul Farmer. This is a book that I had to read for the BookTube prize, and I can't talk about it any more than that. Moving on. The next book I read is Duel with the Devil by Paul Collins. So this was different than I was expecting it to be. I thought it was going to be talking a lot about the actual duel between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. It didn't mention that at all. It's really about the first murder trial in American history. I really liked all of the context that was given to kind of like the lead up of it. Like the first couple of chapters really set up what it was like at the time and all of the like perpetual pandemics that set up kind of like the perfect storm for this murder to happen. Honestly, it didn't really come to a satisfying conclusion, which isn't necessarily like a bad thing, but because you kind of can't come to a satisfying conclusion with something like this, where it's like basically unsolved, but there's lots of sus people all around surrounding the murder. And it was cool to hear about how much of a circus the actual like court case was. Yeah, another thing, like at the time I was reading like 3 different books and they all had to do with either pandemics or epidemics. It was really weird. And like again, the first 3 chapters talked a lot about epidemics, and I was like, I'm over here reading 3 books at the same time that have something to do with pandemics/epidemics in the middle of a pandemic. It was weird to read about. We're getting close to the end, guys, I promise. The next book I read was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. This won the fantasy category. And to me, this just didn't like feel very fantasy to me. I don't really know like what to call it. There just wasn't a lot of like fantasy elements. It was really just like this god character, and that's really it. It's very much real world with few fantastical elements. So the premise of this book is this woman named Addie LaRue. She is kind of put into a marriage that she doesn't want to be in. Well, she's like going to marry, and so what she winds up doing is she winds up praying to the gods who answer at night. She winds up trading her soul for the ability to kind of live forever. But the catch is that nobody remembers her. I thought it was long and boring. There's some interesting like relationships between like the relationships that she has with this like god figure person, and there's also a relationship between her and another person. I did appreciate that both characters are canonically bisexual. I love that. I appreciated that a lot. Yeah, I just don't have much else to say about it other than I think V.E. Schwab's writing is phenomenal, and I want to like look into more of her other work. I just didn't this just didn't click with me personally. I thought it was long. very repetitive, and I remember just sitting there and like putting the book down and looking at how many hours I'd gotten in, and I'd be like, it's been 8 hours and nothing has fucking happened. And that was really annoying. Especially because I felt like there wasn't a whole ton of like character development either. It didn't personally work for me. And also, I've heard some other criticisms about that very last chapter, and I would have to agree. If that last chapter was just kind of left off and it was kept as a more ambiguous ending, I think I would have enjoyed it more. But that's just my opinion. Y'all can like what you like. The next book I read was Hidden Valley Road. This was by Robert Kolker, and I can't talk about that one either because that is a book that I read for the BookTube prize. And the very last book that I read was Minor Feelings by Kathy Park Kwong, and no surprise there, I cannot talk about that one either because that is also a book that was assigned to me for the BookTube prize. So there you go. There is the 18 books that I read. 3 of them really stood out in terms of the ones that I can actually talk about. 5 of them, right? 5 of them I couldn't talk about because of them were just kind of like meh or bad. So, you know, like pretty meh reading book month, but the good ones that were good really hit. But that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. The baby says bye-bye, right? You smell so good because you do not smell like you rolled in grass. And you smelled like ass. She did. She smelled so horrible this morning. I tried to like wipe her off with baby wipes, and that just made it worse. I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna bite the bullet and actually wash this dingleberry. Are you a dingleberry? Are you a dingleberry that wants to go to sleep? She's just like, yes, let me go to sleep. You're a little sleepball. We love you. Alright, thank you guys. Subscribe, do all that stuff. You guys know what to do. Alright, and baby says bye. Baby says bye.